Hey, how's it going, guys? My name is Graham, and welcome to my channel. I have read another book this week, Cytonic by Brandon Sanderson. The first of probably many Brandon Sanderson books happening this year. I mean, this man writes faster than I can breathe, so will we'll ever catch up? I don't know. But yeah, I read Cytonic, the third book in the Skyward series. And well, because this is a new YouTube channel this year, you guys don't really know my thoughts about the series so far. And so this will be a different type of review. I'm going to go through and just show you what I said about the other books. And then I'll get into the spoiler-free review of Cytonic, depending how I feel at that time of if I'm going to go which direction. But yeah, it was interesting. So before we get started talking about this book, let's go ahead, go to the blast of the past from a couple years ago, and talk about Skyward first of the novels. First off, if you haven't heard of this series before, Skyward talks about or is about this girl named Spensa. It is a young adult fantasy or sci-fi fantasy series, and she is on this planet that is constantly oppressed by alien forces. And so she has dreams of becoming a pilot and helping take them down. Her father was a pilot that went missing, so she has a bad rap, and she was born more in poorer circumstances, and so it was a huge battle for her to get to that point. And that's the first book. Skyward is talking about those things and her becoming a space pilot and everything like that. So I found and discovered Skyward a couple years ago because I started to get into reading more. I had a friend who gave me Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series. I started reading that, and it really hooked me of like, oh man, like I need to get back into reading, because I was reading self-help and stuff for my work, but I wasn't really reading books that I enjoyed. And so it got me back into stuff I loved, and I was looking up books, like getting really into just starting my collection. And I noticed on Audible that Skyward was on sale. And so I was like, oh, Brandon Sanderson wrote books outside of fantasy. He wrote a sci-fi thing. I've never even heard of this before. And so I went and bought it for cheap, and I started listening to it when I was doing car rides for work. And so that was my first experience with Skyward. And so this is my review from back then. Let's grab our laptop of what I thought of it. So I put Scud. Where to even beginning? I wasn't expecting to enjoy this as much as I did. I bought it on sale knowing Brandon Sanderson is a great fantasy author, but now realizing he's a great sci-fi young adult author too. The book has everything you need: an angsty teen, a funny AI, and a world the protagonist feels they cannot escape. All I know is I laughed, I cried in a matter of minutes, and had my world turned upside down with twists you didn't see coming. I really enjoyed this book and even felt it was going to be Ender's Game-like until it wasn't at all. I recommend to anyone. It's a story of a girl, a pilot, and has an amazing space battles to boot. So that was my first review of Skyward. All those things happened. When I was listening to this book, I cried, I laughed, I really enjoyed the world that was built here. I enjoyed Spensa. Oh, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Yeah. I enjoyed Spensa with the crew, and it just hit me in the feels, and I loved it. So that's what happened first. Like, that was with Skyward. Moving on, we have our second book, Starsight, which is pretty cool. So, Starsight is a little bit different. So, I went from Skyward, excited, and then I got to Starsight because I wanted to know more about the crew and see them like evolve together. Well, Starsight took a turn that was a little bit different. Spensa pretty much in the beginning of the book just teleports to and swaps places with another alien person and is in a new place called Starsight the entire book. So you don't get to hang out with any of the characters that were developed in the first book. Spensa starts over and kind of has some of the same tones as the first book. And it was kind of shocking, to be honest, because I was really excited to learn about the world more, see where my favorite characters, what they were doing. And she also had a romance with Jerkface or Jorgen in the first book, and I wanted to see more of like what was going on there. And yeah, it just totally changed in Starsight, but it wasn't bad either. It took a second to get used to, but I remember feeling more slow when reading this book. It was harder. So let's see what I read about that, which surprised me. I thought I gave it a lower score, and I might, because I don't really have the best opinions or the best remembrance of this book. but I put the Skyward series is fantastic sci-fi series. The second book dives deep into Spensa really learning more about herself as a human because she now encounters new species. I enjoyed the story and it was a fun ride. I kind of felt a little disappointed that it takes the main character and removes her from the cast from the first book, but all in all, the story gets tied into each other pretty well. If you want a fun sci-fi series, I recommend checking it out. So, again, it was fun. I think one of the things that saved this book for me was Brandon Sanderson has a specific skill, which I can talk more about it in this book too, but he has a skill of being able to bring species or fantasy-like species to life in really cool ways, and he has fun with it too. So this introduced Hesho, I think his name is. I might be saying that wrong. I'm sorry. I apologize. But he is I think they called it like a kitkin, and he's a tiny little fox samurai who's really, really small, who's an emperor, or have quite a few other tiny little kitkins with him that control spaceships. That's pretty cool, right? That's really, really cool. I think there was another pilot that was just gaseous, sentience gas forms, which is really cool. This book dives more into world mechanics of hyper jumping. And in the first book, Spensa finds a slug called Doom Slug, and in the second book, you find out, spoiler warning for the second book, you find out that the slugs are in fact have some sort of magic, Cytonic, and they help them jump through time and space as well. So that's what the second book was about, being able to do that stuff. So that was interesting. Those two, side by side, I liked the first one a lot better. The second one just went into a different direction. And then, as I was getting ready to buy this book when it first came out and not read it, there was novellas that came out. The first one being Sunreach, which is a story about a character in the Skyward flight named FM. And so I was like excited, like, oh, you get to kind of go back there. But there's also a part of me that felt like, is this a cash grab, because they were only available on Audible first, and there was 3 of them. And so this one, Sunreach, what I said about that is if you haven't read Skyward or Starsight, I don't suggest listening to this novella. This book follows FM, a side character from Skyward. It was a cool character developing story. With it being written by Jancy, it added more voice to her and felt different from the other story. The story is fun and dives more into how hyperdrives work in the world. Okay, so that I got those mixed up. Other than that, it really didn't add anything really serious that I feel will be missed if you decide to skip the novella and go straight to the third Skyward book, Cytonic. Right? That was my first opinion of that. The novellas are written by Brandon Sanderson and Jancy Peterson. If you're here, you probably already know that. But that was my thought of it. I thought it was really cool, and it was interesting. Then I listened to Redawn, because you're supposed to listen to Sunreach and then Redawn before you, or read them. They're between Starsight, before Cytonic. So this is how I thought about this. How I felt about Starsight, now it makes sense. One of my issues with the second Skyward book was the fact that Spensa had no new character growth with any of the Skyward flights from the first book. Now I understand Skyward Flight has this series. It describes what they're up to, and I don't know how I feel about it. This book focuses on Analik, the alien that came to destroy us in the beginning of Starsight, and Spensa took her place. This is her story after the events in that book, and the other novella as well. And it's really good. Big things happen here for the humans on Detritus, and Analik finds herself with Skyward Flight most of the way. Though these novellas I find way better than the second book so far, and I like all the developments happening. And Jancy Peterson, the author, really captures the characters well. I think one of my favorite parts is the alien race is a take on elves, the way they are tied closely to humans and live in space trees. I'm curious how the events that happen in this book will affect the rest of the series, and it makes me interested in how Cytonic will handle it as well, if at all. My only fear is that Spensa, the lead from the main Skyward series, will just continue to restart friendships every book, and we will have to then read about those friendships in novels. It feels more like cash grabby than that way, especially because I feel the novellas are taking more risks and telling better stories. With that, Redawn and second of the Skyward novellas gets 4 out of 5 stars. Dang, I was kind of harsh on that with that last little bit, saying it feels more cash grabby that way, especially because I feel the novellas are taking more risks and telling better stories. I really did like Redawn. I thought it was really, really cool. And man, that was a review from 2022 in January, and it's January 2024. So that was 2 years ago, was the last time I experienced the Skyward books in general. So, man, if only Graham back then knew what Graham was going to be reading this time. So let's jump into Cytonic, book 3. Did this go back and hang out with the Skyward flight? The answer is no. It didn't. It started over again. And then another thing hit me. Another realization hit me of what this series is. Not only is it a young adult sci-fi series, however, this is pretty much, in my opinion, like a young adult Star Trek, or Star Trek in general. It's not like people are on the Enterprise doing that type of stuff, but what I mean by that is Star Trek had a pattern, and I'm not an expert by any means. Any Star Trek people, don't come at me. All I'm saying is like the pattern of like the old shows kind of matches this. Star Trek had a pattern of every episode, we're going to go discover a new world that's going to give the main character a life lesson while having an overarching like story in the series. And so it was very epic. Like you could watch it out of order and be like, oh cool, they went to the planet clip clop, you know, where there's horse people, I don't know, and they learned about these people and stuff, and went from there. This is what I feel like Brandon Sanderson's now doing with Starsight and Cytonic. Starsight was Spencer going and hanging out with the overarching enemy, but also with the people that are holding the humans captive, and she has to gain feelings of trust for them, which is a huge story arc. This is, she ends up in a place called the Nowhere. The Nowhere is the between time and space where when they hyper jump is where the slugs take them, and like they're able to then teleport to a different location. So time works funky in the Nowhere. And so she ends up going there with an impression from her abilities, and again she finds new people and becomes pretty much queen of the Nowhere pirates. Not necessarily queen, but becomes like the best pilot there and has to train all these people again. It's pretty much leading to like an Avengers story. And so her first character she runs into is Chet, and then she runs into Peg and her pirate crew, and she the new alien that's introduced was like geodes that are all kind of taking over a ship. So like rock formations are on a ship, but the rocks are sentient, and so they can talk through vibrations to you, and you're like, oh, that's cool, that's neat. And so her life lesson is, of course, in this world, she keeps losing her memories of her friends and stuff because time works different. You begin to lose yourself. And so it was a lot about discovering who you are. There's a lot of connections with M-Bot, who is the AI in this story. And so it was a very interesting lesson there. But yet, there's part of me that was still just a little disappointed in like not having more of characters that you know. There's one character that does come back from Starsight in here. In the interludes, she talks to her love interest Jorgen through Star Wars Ghost Force Ghosts, essentially. And yeah, it's interesting. I really, to be positive, on a positive note, I liked this better than I liked Starsight. Yeah. I would actually give Starsight more of a 3 stars, for sure. This would probably end up with the 4 stars. I liked the characters in here more, and there's a lot more humor and like fun in this book. There was a lot. I feel like Brandon Sanderson wanted to have fun in this story as well, and so because they couldn't remember faces very well or their family, they remembered stories really well, and so there was a time where Spencer starts telling stories, and one of the stories she's retelling is about these warriors named Simba and Scar, and they're barbarian tribes, and you're like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing here. You're just telling the Lion King, but in like, if the Lion King hasn't existed for thousands of years and was just told audibly, it's going to be messed up, and so now this person just thinks they were like a barbarian clan that's supposed to be teaching about all this stuff. So it's kind of funny in that regard of like, here's that. There's another one where she's like, you know, the good guy, Satan, right? So she thinks that Satan was the good guy from a biblical story. If you're not religious or don't know about that, but like we all know the devil or whatever. She thinks the devil's a good guy because he fought for what he believed in, and you're like, nice. Like, she doesn't actually believe that as a religious format. It's just like a story that got passed down, and now she interpreted it in a different way, and it's kind of funny. So there's a little humorous parts that way. MBot, the artificial intelligence, begins to obtain feelings, and there's a lot of explanation of what feelings are and how they are, and that plays a bigger role in what this book does with that. MBot's role is huge in this story. Chet's role is huge in this story. Chet reminds me of a very particular character from a Disney movie. And I'll put a picture of him here. If you get it, you get it. But yeah, it was an interesting, really good book. I enjoyed it. I was nervous. It took me a couple years to pick this up, obviously, right? So I think this came out in 2022, and I bought it immediately, or I bought it that like as soon after it came out, and it took me a couple years to read it because I think after I listened to that, there was just something that was just making me go like, I don't know. And I'm glad I picked it up. This was a lot of fun. I liked it better than Starsight. Don't like it better than Skyward, but the vibe of the series has changed, right? I thought it was going to be a lot more like kind of like young adult dark sci-fi a little bit with Skyward. Starsight kind of had a little bit of spookiness to it. Cytonic was just like, we're having fun, and it's like Star Trek where it's like, we're now exploring this world, and here's what life is like, and here's these beasts, and here's my life lesson. While there's an overarching story with the Delvers and the superiority that's involved, that's the big major threat of this series. Interesting. It's interesting how they handled it. Like there's a lot. It's like 90% exploring, and then like 10% like continuation of the storyline of where Spence is supposed to go. So I really enjoyed it. So I give Cytonic 4 stars. So far, I gave 4 stars for a lot of these books. I do think this series is good. There's just a few nitpicks that irritate me. Of course, Starsight is a 3. I'll have to update that on my Goodreads. I don't know why I gave it a 4. I did not, like, thinking back on it, I did not enjoy it as much as Skyward or Cytonic. And it's been a couple years. Like, it's been a couple years since I read it, and so it's had more time to really, like, sit in my mind. And it's forgettable compared to the novellas. Like, I was remembering the novellas a lot more. There is another novella after Cytonic that I need to listen to about Jorgen's point of view. And then I'll get on to Defiant. So yeah, that's my rating. 4 stars out of 5 stars for Cytonic. It was a fun read. Really enjoyed it. And I recommend the series to you too. If you're looking for just a fun sci-fi series romp that's kind of Star Trekian, where it's like, I come here and do this, and you have that mindset and don't get so excited about the first book. It just went a different direction than you thought it was, and that's cool. So I recommend the series. It's fun. Go check it out. I'm excited to read or listen to the novella, and then read Defiant here and then in the next month, and go from there. So yeah, that's our review, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I made my goal this week of reading a book, and so if you want to keep following along, making sure I read my read a book a week goal, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. And thanks for spending time with me on this awesome Saturday. So have a great day, and I'll talk to you guys later.